to country. Even then, there was a whole lot of rock in that. We were proud to be country, but that didn't mean that we had to be trapped in country music conventions or the way the artists were treated. Maybe if I stopped trying to fit in and started saying, fuck it, it'd give me more of a chance to do things my way. If it didn't work, I'd be the only one to blame. I want you to meet Neil Reshin, Richie said. You're not going to like him at all. He's not like anything you're used to, and you're not going to trust him. But he's what you need now. I had asked RCA for an advance on royalties, $25,000, so I could get by while I was recuperating. At first, the New York office agreed, and then Jerry Bradley came to my house. He was Orrin Bradley's son, and he had taken over most of Chet's executive duties at the record company. Richie had brought Neil around that day, and he was sitting quietly in the room when Jerry showed up. I was flat on my back, and he didn't know who Neil was, and I wasn't about to tell him. Jerry said to me, if you sign again for 5%, we'll let you have $5,000. The royalty was the same as I'd gotten as a newcomer. He went on about how bad he felt coming out there while I was sick and telling me that. And he even brought my record royalty statements to show me that this was all they could give me. Though they wanted to help me in any way they could, and really, they loved me and thought of me as part of the RCA family. I thanked him and told him that I'd think about it. After Jerry left, I sat down and we went over the statement with Neil. Reshin was about as un-Nashville as you could get. His company, Media Consulting, specialized in audits, and he had worked with Miles Davis and Frank Zappa. He was used to difficult clients. Neil ran his eyes over the figures. They're a bunch of whoas, was all he said. And he didn't need to add or subtract any more. When Bradley came back, I told him that I wouldn't honor the new contract. Before I signed that, I'll quit, and I won't be recording anymore. Jerry later confided in me that he was never so glad when someone said no, that he felt like a snake trying to take advantage of me when I was so down. Driving back to the airport, Richie introduced Neil to Willie Nelson. Willie had retreated to Texas by that time, and like a lizard in his lair, he hardly ever came out of Austin. Neil's going to be Waylon's manager, Richie said. Well, let him manage me too, said Willie. Typical. There was a time when Neil fed me and Willie, and if it hadn't been for him, I don't know what we'd have done. He helped us a lot. He got things for us that no country singer had ever gotten before. If we were going to become outlaws, though we didn't know that yet, we needed an outlaw manager, as Willie called him. Now, Neil was perfect for the part. He was like a mad dog on a leash. When he got his teeth into something, he never let go. Now, he placed himself between us and the business as usual. And he wasn't about to be distracted by somebody throwing us a bone. We knew it wasn't going to be a forever thing. I told Willie, I said, someday we're going to have to run him off, but we can have a good ride. We never went to the trouble of working out a contract between us. Why bother? Neil was a genius at negotiation, and Willie and I had no chance of coming out ahead. He'd figure ways of beating people or making people beat themselves, and he'd get them ugly looks on his face. He must have practiced for hours on end, making faces in the mirror and practicing his responses. He could sit silent endlessly. It would just drive you crazy. The first one that spoke gave in. That was the way things were done. We were in Chet Atkins' office with all the executives from New York negotiating a new record deal. Frank Mancini was there and Joe Galante. New York could tell Nashville what to do, but Nashville couldn't tell New York a thing. The power of attorney only flowed one way. Neil wanted me to see how it was done. He was making these faces. I wanted to slap him myself, and he was on my side. But he knew what he was doing. If you peeve somebody to the point of anger, you jar them from their train of thought, and he wanted RCA off balance. It was down to a $25,000 sum, and they were not going to give it to me, and Neil wanted it. So we were sitting there, not a word spoken, and the silence got unbearable. You could hear the clock tick in the room. Minutes passed. I got up, never said a word, and just walked out. I went to the bathroom to take a leak. When I came back, Neil greeted me in the hall. "You're a friggin' genius," he said. I said, "What?" "Walking out like that." That sewed it up. He was really happy. He said, "Where'd you go?" And I said, "I had to take a piss." And he said, "Well, that was a $25,000 piss." They asked me where you went, and I told them I didn't know. "Waylon's mad, I'm sure, and he's crazy. He's liable to do anything." "Well, will he be back?" they wanted to know, and I shrugged. "I guess he's gone, and we might as well call this meeting to a close." And that's when they gave us the money. It was probably the best time to apply pressure to RCA. There was something coming to the surface in my career. They saw that I was about to happen, and with or without their help. Willie had been given a career boost with his shift to Atlantic, and that was one of the labels that was bidden for me. RCA didn't know when or how, but they knew they would regret losing me. It didn't help that they got caught with their britches down. They were stealing me blind. But one day I got the idea to find out what they were paying the songwriter, as far as mechanical royalties were concerned. Now, if I'd been the only one to record that song, and I found out what the publisher received, I could compare it with my own sales statement. Red Lane was the sole writer on Walk On Out of My Mind, and I was the only artist that had recorded it. From experience, I knew that Tree Music, his publisher, would not stand for getting shortchanged. So I called him to find out how much money in mechanicals that he had made on the record. I discovered that they'd only paid me half of what they owed me, holding the rest in reserve for returns. The reserve amounted to about $150,000 once you got through inspecting their books. When the smoke had cleared, I'd gotten a new recording contract that I could live with. My percentage was up close to 8%. I also received $70,000 up front. When they handed me the check, they asked me what I was planning to do with the money. "I'm going to start my own label," I answered. "If you think I'm going to put up with you guys, you're crazier than hell." "I told you he was crazy," said Frank Mancini. The best part was getting my own production company, which meant I could record my own records and then hand in the completed masters to RCA. WGJ Productions. It had a nice ring. Waylon Goddamn Jennings Productions. Free at last. I finally had control over my music, how it was going to be advertised, promoted, sweetened, or in my case, soured and mixed. Chet always worried that I was out to destroy something. He thought that I was determined to ruin country music, that there would be no reason for people like himself and Owen Bradley to produce records. That was never my intention. There are always people who need ideas, but I'm not someone who can be told what to do musically. Now, if you stop and think about it, it was not that I'm such a genius. It might have been that I'm just not smart enough to follow instructions. I have to do what I feel. What I was fighting for was the right to try things my way, at least one time. I felt I had that right. Win or lose, I was now able to use my band, choose my own songs, and turn up the bass drum. In theory, that is. Though I had agreed to record in their studios with their engineers, soon enough I found out that that was not going to work. They were on the phone half the time, calling Jerry Bradley upstairs at RCA and telling him what I was doing. I was still screwed. This time was a song that I had written 4 years previously. RCA had said that it wasn't any good, but with my newfound freedom, it became the centerpiece of one of my first albums under the WGJ logo. Recorded in October of 1973, Willie played guitar on it and helped me put it together, along with a couple of his songs, Heaven and Hell, and one of my personal favorites, It's Not Supposed to Be That Way. As we worked, it became apparent that I was destined to go through the same runarounds every time I stepped outside of Nashville's musical city limits. Finally, I'd had enough, and I moved the sessions to Tom Paul Glazer's Hillbilly Central Studios at 916 19th Avenue South. RCA protested mightily, but I told them that this is the way it was going to be from now on. This time went to number 1 in June 1974. It was my first chart-topping smash. Tom Paul and I were best friends. We'd met about the time he broke up with his brothers, and I kind of took their place in his life. He had been in town a lot longer than I had, and I think I was a little in awe of him, really. I loved his singing so much, but when he started airing his opinion, And he did have an opinion on about everything. You couldn't shut him up. And one of my favorite Glazier Brothers songs was called Words Come Easy. In Tom Paul's case, it couldn't have been more accurate. He'd rather argue than care whether he was right or wrong. Tom Paul will argue with God when he gets there, or the devil, whichever one grabs him first. We had a good time tearing up Nashville, and there'll always be a place in my heart for Tom Paul. We're on a motorcycle, me and Willie, riding past 5 miles of backed-up traffic. People hollering, car doors opening in front of us, flags waving, girls leaning off of pickup trucks and frisbees flying. A different song from each radio as we zip along the shoulder. We're covered with caliche dirt and shouting ourselves hoarse, heading for the Dripping Springs reunion. Independence Day, 1973.